Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Tuesday, October 29th, 2024. 1 week until the election. I am John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
Media commentary columnist Christine Rosen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John.
And Washington commentary columnist Matthew Continetti. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John.
Imagine this scenario. A white supremacist takes to a street in Chicago and guns down a black man while saying whites forever or Heil Hitler or something like that. And I believe within hours, Kamala Harris would be making a statement about the rise of white supremacy, the connection to this event of the Nazi rally at Madison Square Garden and the like. Well, Saturday morning, this past Saturday morning, a man on his way to synagogue in the neighborhood of West Rogers Park, Chicago, was shot in the shoulder by a gunman who then disappeared and reappeared and engaged police in gunfire, eventually disabled, caught on the ring camera of a neighbor of the assailed, shouting Allahu Akbar. He was arrested. It took 2 days for us to find out his name. His name is Sidi Mohammed Abdallahi, 22 years old, facing 6 counts of attempted first-degree murder. And you know what's really remarkable? Police can discern no motive. Chicago police, under the auspices or the guidance of Mayor Brandon Johnson, elected in a close election that turned on crime and on Black Lives Matter issues and came out to the benefit of the Black Lives Matter politician Brandon Johnson, can discern no motive in a man yelling Allahu Akbar and then shooting an Orthodox Jew in the shoulder as he was on his way to synagogue. This hits me a little personally. The place that the man was shot is 6 blocks from my brother-in-law's house. It's 3 blocks from where my wife was born and where her parents grew up, in the neighborhood of West Rogers Park, which has been, though there was a terrible incident a couple of years ago, is a very unusual neighborhood in America because Muslims and very Orthodox Jews live cheek by jowl, and the major shopping street being Devon Avenue, has this bizarre quality of having a halal this, followed by a kosher pizzeria, followed by some kind of Islamic bank, followed by a phone store where you can get, cheap SIM cards to call Pakistan, followed by a travel agency, followed by a yeshiva, followed by a Islamic kindergarten, followed by another yeshiva. So it is as melting pot can get, and people seem to have lived in relative equanimity over the last 15, 20 years and with almost no incident. So that's this story. And as I say, I find it absolutely astounding that we have an attempted murder of an Orthodox Jew as a religious crime in the United States, kind of comparable to an event that you might see in a Paris banlieue or something like that. And where is the news story? I find it, I'm right here. What I'm reading to you from is a story on WBBM, that's Channel 2, local Channel 2 news in Chicago. Not much to be seen elsewhere. Very few words spoken by, say, I don't know, the senator of Illinois, Dick Durbin.
And also, we don't even have to wonder, John, you asked originally, what if this had been reversed? And we already know, because Jussie Smollett was Chicago and Kamala Harris was the lead, was the head of the parade for Jussie Smollett, who, had hired immigrants to beat him up at 2 a.m. outside a subway or whatever it was in Chicago, yelling, this is this is Magaland or whatever it was. And she called that a modern day lynching. So and that went on for quite some time. Her standing by Jussie and the reaction that it caused, even though, the story itself, a lot of people who live in Chicago said, I know that it doesn't really make a lot of sense in my head, whatever. But she was by far Jussie's biggest cheerleader. And this is, that's what I would think of. That's first of all. And second of all, I would say that, on the hate crime thing, this is, these things are discussed and they are politically motivated, and they are not in big cities in America like Chicago. You don't have some cartoon sheriff wandering around going, well, I just don't know, everything in Chicago with the police it goes up to the highest level. We know that. We remember the scandals from Rahm Emanuel when he was mayor and the pressure he put on the cops to say certain things and to classify certain things a certain way. So
also, it's important to know.
This is the same thing. I'm sorry. This is the same thing when Major Hassan shut up Fort Hood and it was classified as workplace violence, or the Pulse nightclub shooting was, oh, well, it was a man dealing with his sexuality, and so he killed all the people in the gay bar. It's a liberal trope to obscure Islamist violence, and we see it now playing out in the streets of Chicago. And there's also another sad case that shows the double standard here, and that was this awful stabbing of the 6-year-old child in Illinois, for Palestinian American child, not long after October 7th. That killing was addressed by the highest levels of the American government, by the President of the United States and by the Vice President. In fact, they marked the anniversary of this tragic incident. Now, in this case, the victim seems to be in stable condition, but it's clearly a hate crime, and it deserves attention, the similar amount of attention at the highest level.
Let's be reminded of one important detail. That event took place on Saturday, October 26th. October 28th was the 6th anniversary of the Tree of Life massacre in Pittsburgh, which, of course, was the worst anti-Semitic event in modern American history. What's the distinction there? Who did Tree of Life? A white supremacist.
Right.
Outraged about immigration and the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society. All I wanted to...
Well, I just wanted to add to Matt's point. There's two trends, I think, coming together here. One is, as Matt says, the impulse to downplay Islamist violence. The other that we've seen since October 7th last year is the impulse to treat violence against Jews as ephemera. Not really news, not really crime, maybe not even really happening, rumors of it kind of happening, covered locally, covered in conservative media precincts alone, certainly not addressed at the highest levels. So both of those come together in this case.
And where was the Kamala Harris campaign yesterday? What were they doing with regard to anti-Semitism? They had sent Doug Emhoff to Pittsburgh to mark the Tree of Life synagogue to memorialize that horrible event, where his reassurance to Jewish voters amounted not to any sort of strong statement against anti-Semitism or policy matters that Harris would enact if she became president, but to say that she feels it in her kishkas. That was the extent of their analysis of the largest rise in anti-Semitism in this country. And I say all this somewhat sarcastically, but also with a bit of anger, because they have willfully disregarded what happened on campuses last spring, what's been happening since October 7th. That's a choice. It is a choice not to come out in front of cameras and say this is unacceptable, regardless of the motive, or even if you don't know the motive, just to say this person was targeted. We will not accept this violence. They don't do that.
We are going on close to a quarter century in which the opinion of elites, people who make up the news budgets of organizations, budgets by which I mean daily stories that are put out by news organizations, by our elected officials, and by campus authorities and people in the elites, almost a quarter century in which it is understood that one of the gravest dangers to American civilization is Islamophobia. That has been a line since September 12th. It was a line promulgated by George W. Bush himself when he was president. It has proceeded apace with Barack Obama in 2015 and 2016, 2011 and 2012, and then 2016, downplaying actual events of Islamist violence in the United States, not just the Pulse shooting, but the San Bernardino Christmas party shooting and others, where the deliberate decision was, we do not talk about the origins, the purpose, or the meaning of this event for fear that it is going to stimulate an attack on American Muslims. And you would think after a quarter century and a concordant rise over the course of that quarter century, escalating in the past year to astronomical levels of anti-Semitic and anti-Jewish violence, that one narrative would be displaced by the other simply by dint of the fact that the fear of the anti-Islamic, anti-Muslim violence did not materialize in any systematic or notable way. Hate crimes in the United States, majority of hate crimes involve Jews. If you're talking certainly about religious or ethnic minority groups, like a majority, well beyond a majority. There are other kinds of hate crimes, anti-gay hate crimes, and things like that. It hasn't happened. It's been a quarter century. It is time to retire this nonsense. It is a form of cover for radical organizations like CARE and others who use it as a way of organizing anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic activity by saying you can't write about us or cover us or do investigative journalism about us, because if you do so, you could reap the whirlwind in the form of terrible violence against poor Muslims.
And there's one other big difference here, an important difference, is that the guy who shot the Jewish man in Chicago yelled Allahu Akbar. The guy who stabbed the Palestinian boy was not a Jewish extremist angry about how less than 3 weeks earlier, 1,200 of his, brothers and sisters in Israel were brutally murdered. In Vermont, the 3 Palestinian boys who were college age and walking around a college town and who were shot and injured, one of them permanently injured, I think, disabled from it. The shooter was not a Jewish guy who was angry about the outbreak of anti-Semitism. And in fact, the closest you can come to anything like that is where we had the situation in Massachusetts where the Jewish leftist ran at and attacked repeatedly a pro-Israel non-Jew, who then in the second go-round, in the second tussle, shot him with a illegal gun he had on him and treated him and whatever. So that's another important difference here, is that there is not an explosion of violence between communities either. The risk that everybody talks about and that you mentioned when CARE says don't talk about Muslims because people might hurt them, nobody thinks Jews are going to hurt them. But Jews have been the victims both of street violence and on campus by people who are directly protesting the war. So if there is anything that counts as incitement, it is everything going on everything being said about Israel and about Jews.
Can I just add one more thing about the assailant? His origin is not confirmed, but there are reports that he is an illegal immigrant. And this, I think, will only amplify concerns about the border or just the illegal immigration problem more generally. Again, it's not clear whether he's a visa overstay or he crossed the border. But the issue of illegal immigration and of Muslim immigration is a major factor in the rise of populist politics. And I think it should be something that is at least on the minds of Jewish voters, as they recognize that what's happened in Europe is, as Muslim populations have increased in various European countries, the safety and security of the Jewish communities has diminished. And we certainly don't want something similar happening in the United States.
I think even more important than that, that's very important, but is that we now have this lapidary nature of media coverage of news in the United States, particularly over the past month and over the course of the next week, which is that people have to look at news stories when they're in newsrooms and think about them from two directions. And then we can talk about Jeff Bezos, because that's where I want to go with this, which is there are news stories. And one of the major news stories of this election is the role that illegal immigration is playing in the decision-making of voters. And that's an obvious story to cover because it is one of the three major elements. Of course, you cover the economy. There are going to be economic numbers released all this week. Unemployment, GDP, various other things. Obviously, those will be centerpieces of abortion, also very much under discussion everywhere. Illegal immigration, you then, if you're in the newsroom trying to figure out what you're going to cover the next day, where you're going to deploy your resources to cover things, you're then, whether consciously or unconsciously, and in most cases consciously now, you are saying, what will I do here in making decisions that could help Donald Trump get elected? And if I am helping Donald Trump get elected, I am going to soft pedal X and emphasize Y. And this is now, most of this, for the course of my political life, has been implicit. It is not a conversation that you need to have. Everybody shares the same values. Everybody shares the same worldview. It's understood what you emphasize and what you don't. Nobody's got to look at each other meaningfully. Nothing like that. You all share the same cultural biases. Now you have this number one, number two issue in front of the American people. And we now actually have active news suppression. This story is not only a suppressed story by the Chicago police, it's a suppressed story by the Chicago media, suppressed story by the national media, because it has these two elements, one of which is the Islamic attack, an Islamist attack on a Jew. And the other is, if he's an illegal immigrant, we suddenly have a new, fresh story in the middle of this city that has become the poster child for out-of-control crime, taking place in which an illegal immigrant shoots a Orthodox Jew. And how does that tie in with this incredibly powerful ad that the Trump campaign put out yesterday of the mother of the 12-year-old girl who was raped and murdered by two illegals in California, and how she'll never see her again, footage of this girl as a baby, them having her birthday party together, all of that. It's enough to make you want to crawl under the table and cry. It's so wrought.
It's also, it was interesting, and we chatted about this a little bit on our text chain, but that ad is the response to anyone who says the Trump campaign can't reach out to largely female voters on this empathy thing, as the Democrats have been doing this entire election cycle on abortion, telling the stories of these women who've died as a result of not having access. This ad is very clear, and it's all this mom just talking about her daughter and what happened, and she's almost reluctant to bring politics into it at the end. And I think that's she comes across as really just struggling with this.
I don't know what you two are talking about, because according to Politico, the main political story this day is that outrage at the stupid, bad taste joke of a comedian at a Madison Square Garden rally is spreading like wildfire and turning the entire Hispanic population of the United States against Donald Trump. Like, that's what I'm reading in the papers with this ad that you're mentioning. I mean, I don't even know what you're referring to.
Get out of your bubble.
It's spreading like wildfire. Everyone is outraged at what this comedian said. Outraged.
So conventionally, we are in the closing argument phase of the election, and Kamala Harris is giving what will not be her closing argument because it's Tuesday night. It's giving a speech on the ellipse at the site that Donald Trump gave his speech on the ellipse on January 6th to talk about the threats to democracy and all of that. Obviously, she's going to do a lot more over the course of the subsequent 6 days and travel around the battleground states and all of that. But she's about to make this speech about the rise of fascism and the threat to democracy and all of that. Trump does not have Trump's closing argument is viewed in these 2 or 3 ads that he has released. One of them is the positive ad. That is, look where I left the country. Here's what I can do to restore things to where they were before I left office, that ran during football games on Sunday. And it's mostly positive, though it hits Harris negatively. The second ad is the one I just mentioned about the woman whose daughter was killed by illegal immigrants. The third is this ad with men. And the ad with men says, Kamala Harris, we do not oppose you because we have no problem electing a woman president. We oppose you because of your policies. And then it goes systematically through every bad Biden policy. Now, that's a better closing argument, by which I mean not that it's better because it's more substantive or that the case against Trump as an anti-Democrat is not a good argument. I actually think it is a good argument as long as it's connected to larger issues like he's bad because he wants to threaten our democracy and limit our freedoms and maybe limit your rights to abortion and control your body. And I'm going to do X, Y, and Z for you and make your life better. The and part is what they seem to have dropped. They've dropped the and. They are not yes anding, as we say in improv. They are yes butting.
They are anding, but their and is not appealing to an electorate that's losing trust in a lot of its institutions, because it's what Doug Emhoff said in Pittsburgh. It's what Kamala Harris has been saying on the campaign trail. Trust me, trust us, trust the Democratic Party. If you think she's an empty suit, trust us to keep running the country because he's a wild card. That is their and, but I don't think it's landing in the way that, I mean, we'll see on election night, but that's the and.
The remarkable thing here, I'm inclined to agree with John. I haven't been seeing the and either. The way these closing messages have been covered is fascinating, because you see stories that read like Trump winds down campaign with fear, Harris with hope. And I'm thinking, actually, it's kind of entirely inverted, isn't it?
It occurred to me reading the walk-ups to her speech today at the Ellipse that everyone's talking about the January 6th parallel. But my mind went back to Trump's acceptance speech at the 2020 National Convention when he gave a speech. I think it was on the South Lawn. So the White House was in the background, but it wasn't as far away as the Ellipse from the residence and from the mansion itself. And at that time, the media and the resistance exploded in outrage. How dare Donald Trump campaign in front of the White House, where he lived, by the way. And how dare he use the White House this sacred symbol of our democracy for political purposes. And 4 years later, that not only is Harris doing exactly what Trump did in 2020, but the Harris campaign and her media surrogates are celebrating the fact that she is giving this speech a week before the election in Washington, D.C., in front of the White House, telling media outlets that, well, we want people to picture her in the White House. They're having trouble picturing her there, but if we put her physically in front of the White House, maybe that will trigger some kind of acceptance that, yes, she can be our president for 4 years.
Her big line, her big applause line in the rally that she had with Michelle Obama over the weekend, which was, here is this man. He says he wants to cancel the Constitution. He says he wants to have the powers of a dictator for a day. This man should never stand behind the seal of the President of the United States of America. The seal. So what she is saying is not that he shouldn't sit in the Oval Office, not that he shouldn't exercise the powers of the presidency. He shouldn't look like he's the president. He shouldn't look like he can stand at a podium and it says President of the United States of America on the podium. I should be standing at that podium. I'm not telling you what I'm going to do. I don't actually have any idea what I'm going to do, but I'll look really good behind that seal. Now, I'm only saying this because I think sometimes rhetoric like this, which is written, I was a speechwriter, you go through many processes. People think things sound good on the ear, but sometimes it's inadvertently revelatory of something. It's like, if you want a piece of cardboard to have your photograph taken in front of the fence outside 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, so that you look like you were having your picture taken by the president in front of the White House, who do you want on that piece of cardboard, Donald Trump or me? Because I'm the one who could stand behind the seal better. Not, I'm going to deal with inflation. Not, I'm going to take care of Iran.
And you also don't have
the nuclear threat.
The current president, who, for all I know, I'm not clear about his schedule today. Biden could actually be in the White House as Harris is giving her speech at 7:30 p.m., but she doesn't want him anywhere near it because his approval rating is clocking in at about 39%. And remember, a very good gauge of presidential results is the current president's approval rating. And this is an unusual election for a bazillion reasons, but if you look at that approval rating, you can't have a strong confidence that the Democrats are going to have a great night.
I am fascinated by the fact that as the election comes to a close for in a week, there are decent pieces of economic data that a more confident campaign might deploy. Not saying we did everything great. They can say is, as you go into the ballot box, no, gas prices are below $3, inflation is down to 2%, and I'm not gonna terminate the Constitution. So we are on a path that's good, and you can trust that I'm not going to change the nature of America as we know it, if that argument is going. They must know that saying that thing that I just said not only isn't going to work, but is problematic because it's going to remind people of the economic pain that they have suffered over the last 4 years. And they don't want to. So I'm going to assume again, as I do, that they're rational actors. They're good at politics. They've chosen this final message because they've done an immense amount of research and they think it's the only message that is resonating for them and is going to work. And that's why I want to move on to the New York Times story. Harris aides quietly grow more bullish on defeating Trump, published yesterday by Reed Epstein, Lisa Lehrer, and my friend Maggie Haberman. Okay. As the presidential contest enters the final sprint, campaign aides and allies close to Vice President Kamala Harris are growing cautiously optimistic about her chances of victory, saying the race is shifting in her favor. So you read that paragraph, you're like, ooh, this is a game changer. We're now about to have delivered to us the information that should be making people in Palm Beach at Mar-a-Lago quake in their boots and start planning their post-election vacation cruises.
Sprint to the finish.
Officials within the Harris campaign and people with whom they have shared candid assessments believe she remains in a solid position in the northern blue wall states of Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, saying internal polling shows her slightly ahead in all three, though by as little as half a percentage point. Now, if you look at the poll averages, I believe in the New York Times' own front page poll averages say that these states are even. Some of them, they literally say even. If they have internal polling showing her slightly ahead in all three, why aren't they showing it to us? Oh, it's internal. We can't possibly show it to you. It's a secret. If we do, we're going to get into big trouble.
Well, or we won't.
Secret pollster community.
We're ahead by half a point in one of the blue wall states, but we won't tell you which one, Donald Trump.
And there is no such thing, as every pollster in the world knows, as being ahead by half a point. There is this thing called the margin of error. If you're ahead by half a point, you're not ahead. You have a series of possibilities. You could be ahead by 4, or you could be down by 3. There is no such thing as being ahead by half a point. They think she remains competitive across the 4 Sunbelt battleground states. Note, we see no reference to internal polling saying she remains competitive. They think she remains competitive.
Also, nobody classifies a poll as by half point. Ever.
Right.
You always, if it's 47-47, it's tied. It's not 47.5. Right. It's like a kid who's like, I'm not 5, I'm 5.5.
Right.
That's what this
means. Exactly. So they think she remains competitive across the 4 Sunbelt battleground states, but not even the supporting secret top double probation poll is mentioned, providing some evidence for their thoughts here. And Arizona and North Carolina appear to be the toughest swing states for Ms. Harris, these Democrats said, and they feel better about Georgia and Nevada. Why? Why do they feel better?
This is where actually I think it's useful to bring in the blistering letter that Jeff Bezos wrote in the Washington Post, because he says something that clearly the editors of the New York Times are not embraced in. And that's the bitter pill of reality. I actually did like that line that he had. He says, reality is an undefeated champion. It would be easy to blame others for our long and continuing fall in credibility. He's talking about the media's credibility. But a victim mentality will not help. Complaining is not a strategy. But this idea that the perceptions that people have about how the media behaves, that's perfectly captured in this New York Times story, which is literally trying to create a sandcastle for the Harris campaign going into the week before the election. And whatever she says today on the ellipse, they will praise. And there's been very little. In fact, I would say read that piece and then go to the Wall Street Journal and read Gerard Baker's column today, which just is a laundry list. It's not a guy who's a huge Trump fan. It's just a laundry list of how a lot of people feel about the Democratic machine, not just Kamala Harris personally as a candidate, but what this political party has brought to the nation in the last 4 years, including the vacuousness of Harris, but also the deceitfulness of covering for the current president who's not able to perform his role as president.
I just love all the reversals, because in the New York Times piece, they talk about the data, the actual data, showing that Republicans are doing well in the early vote, which is something that has not happened before. Republicans typically wait until election day to vote. This year, it seems, and maybe it's a result of the electorate more or less leaning Republican as a whole, that Republicans are doing well in the early vote, especially in places like Nevada and Georgia. But the New York Times reads this through its sources at the Democratic campaign as saying that, well, The Republicans are just eating into their vote. They're cannibalizing their vote because they have it in the early vote. Again, 4 years ago, it was that's what Republicans were saying about Democrats. And the Democrats won in 2020. I mean, narrowly.
But it's literally true that you're cannibalizing your damn vote. As I've mentioned before, if you shop on Black Friday after Thanksgiving and you buy your Christmas presents on Black Friday, you're cannibalizing your Christmas shopping.
Right. But you're supposed to. That was the whole argument for early voting, is because when Democrats are leading in early voting, they're like, it's great. We're banking the vote.
Yeah.
Now it's, Trump is cannibalizing his vote. Yeah. So that's one reversal that I thought very odd in this amazing story. And the second one was what I like to call the Maggie Haberman special. And I have nothing but respect and admiration for Maggie Haberman, but she does do the special. And that is any time she has a byline on a piece, that is a multiple byline piece like this one, which is mainly involved in Democratic sourcing, you get the one sentence that Maggie Haberman contributed to the piece, which is this: Trump is angry and stressed. Trump is angry and stressed. Every single piece she contributes to is about how Trump is angry and stressed behind the scenes. Ring. And in this case, it's because he's been late. He's overscheduled, and that's making him angry and stressed. Okay. On the other hand, he's been late because he did a 3-hour interview with Joe Rogan that's been seen by like 34 million people at this point. And then he went to the rally. I know we're not supposed to like the rally at Madison Square Garden, but he went to a sold-out rally at Madison Square Garden, which was essentially a second Republican convention, right? It's weird. It's like, let's just do the Republican convention over again. Let's make it more MAGA than Mar-a-Lago campaign, to use my distinction from yesterday, but it's still a huge event. And now we're going to be crisscrossing the swing states as we do every 4 years that Trump has been the nominee and the candidate for the Republicans. So I can imagine that he'd be a little bit angry and stressed. He'd probably a little bit angry at that stand-up comic who delivered the stupid joke about Puerto Rico. But does that really mean that he's going to lose the election? I don't see how the equation works out in the way that the Times is presenting in this article.
Okay, we got to go on with the hopium part, not the angry and stressed part, but the hopium part.
Special.
By the way, maybe he's angry and stressed. I don't know.
He's always angry and stressed. So am I.
But if you've been watching Trump over the weekend, if you listened to him on Joe Rogan, if you watched him on Sunday night, that was not angry and stressed Trump. I mean, we know angry and stressed Trump. Angry and stressed Trump is a different person. Like he gets red in the face. He makes horrible fun of Serge Kovaleski's disability. Like, that's angry and stressed Trump. Joe Rogan, he's talking about whales and how the whales are suffering from the windmills, and he wants to be a whale psychiatrist and stuff like that. That is not angry and stressed Trump. But I got to read the real heart of this, as we say, hopium piece in the New York Times. Few Democrats dispute that there. Oh, by the way, this article is based on interviews with more than 24 political strategists, campaign aides, pollsters, and others close to the two campaigns and candidates, many of whom insisted on anonymity to discuss internal deliberations. 24 people who you just call up and say, "How do you feel things are going?" is basically what they're saying here.
20 of the 24 are in the others category.
Okay. Few Democrats dispute that the race appears extraordinarily competitive. Polling averages show that all seven battleground states are within the margin of error, meaning the difference between a half point up and a half point down, essentially a rounding error, could win or lose the White House. That's actually not what margin of error means. Margin of error refers to the accuracy of the reading of the electorate in the polls. What it means is, yes, this election could be won or lost by half a point in the battleground states. That has nothing to do with the margin of error or polling. But I digress. the tempered sense of Democratic confidence follows a period of high anxiety in the party as polls tightened in recent weeks. But now Ms. Harris and other party leaders have begun to discard their winking warnings that she is the underdog. Make no mistake, we will win, she said at a rally on Sunday in Philadelphia. We will win because if you know what you stand for, you know what to fight for. That is the only piece of evidence in this 1,500-word story that says that she's going to win, is a line in a speech in which she says, make no mistake, we're going to win, as her campaign has Michelle Obama and others yelling at men and saying, you know what, we're going to withhold sex from you if you don't vote for Kamala Harris, which is something I heard people saying on Mark Halpern's two-way last night. And Julia Roberts recorded an ad, the single most condescending thing I've ever heard, where it's like, hey, women, you know what? If you go into the polling place and you want to vote for Kamala Harris, it's okay because no one will ever know. It's like, you don't have to tell your abusive husband from sleeping with the enemy that you voted for Kamala Harris because we have a secret ballot. So it's really going to be okay. Just go in, vote for Kamala Harris, and don't tell anyone.
And speaking of secrets, we have Harris caught on the hot mic telling Gretchen Whitmer that they need to move mail votes.
Right.
Well, pretending to enjoy another beer.
Yes, yeah. Over a beer.
And they sent Obama out. They sent Barack Obama out yesterday to echo similarly what his wife Michelle Obama had said previously. So they're sending out the big guns to shame the men.
I mean, since when does voter shaming work? I'm not somebody who I've never really worked on the nuts and bolts of campaigns. So I don't know what people who really know campaigns know as well. And, there are people who know things in their kishka. You also know that they make terrible mistakes a lot of the time. But you also know that a lot of people know technically things, or they see things, or they've seen data for 40 years. And so they know what things they're saying or not saying. So they know they have a problem with men. They know they have a problem with enthusiasm. I'm really unaware of any election that I can think of, or analysis of an election or anything like that, that says that the candidate who yells at voters for their potential misbehavior is doing something that pays off dividends in the polling place. I don't know what theory of elections and the popular mandate says that's the way you court people and get them to vote for you.
Well, especially coming from the left, which is so much against kink shaming, and yet during this campaign has been, calling J.D. Vance weird. And so they've tried a lot of efforts to marginalize culturally what they think the right is in this country. The problem is, to the point that I think we were talking about the other day, and I now have evidence of this because one of my sons been now to a rally of both candidates. And the thing he says, he's an independent voter, first election he gets to vote in. And one of the takeaways, which I did not prompt him, he was describing it. He said, oh yeah, so the Harris rally in Atlanta, he's like, we heard Obama and he's the first president I really remember. And he's talking about all the entertainment. I said, well, so how was Harris? He goes, oh yeah. I mean, she got up and she did her talk, but when it was clear she was winding it up, everybody just started to leave, proving this point that she's just not the same draw. But the shaming of voters, I think, comes only after other strategies of trying to energize their base have failed. So I don't think it's their go-to.
Christine, I just want to say you came up with the perfect response. The Trump MAGA response to shaming men for voting Trump should be don't kink shame.
Don't kink shame. Exactly.
Right. But the classic thing that you do when you're running for office is you walk up to somebody and you put your hand out and you shake their hand and you say, I would really like your vote.
Well, or you flatter them.
That is elections
right.
Since, it's not elections since Athens, since people won by lot. But it is what it means to run for office. Even in a nation of 150 million people, you are symbolically saying to people who haven't made up their minds yet, I would really like your vote. I would really appreciate it if you would vote for me. It would mean a lot. I think we can do a lot of good work together. Please do not be vessels for our rage. I'm warning you, we can be really mad.
Well, she says, Kamala says both. She's out of the other side of her mouth. She always says, I have to earn every vote. I know that. I have to earn every vote to win.
But she doesn't flatter the voter. And that's actually something Trump, in his weird way, does do, as particularly in his rally format. I don't think it's enough just to say, I have to earn your vote or I would like your vote. I mean, that's old school politics. I think now people's vanity requires that they be told that they're amazing. And the flattery that Trump allows is very different from the condescension we're seeing right now from the Harris campaign.
So I think the bottom line for me is no one really knows what's going on. And our friend Mark Halperin says there are three theories of the race. There's the Trump is going to win big theory, and he's definitely going to win. That's number one. Number two is it's a jump ball, maybe with Trump having a slight edge. And then three is it's a jump ball that Harris is going to win. And of the three, he says that the fewest people that he talks to agree with number three. I'm number two. I'm on record. I do not know what's going on. And I think that there is the possibility that we have a slightly 2022's like situation where you have the, triumph of hope over experience, and somehow the Democrats pull this out. But I will say that the New York Times article this morning, published last night, didn't give me any data to support the idea that this will be a 2022 redux. In fact, the more you read into the article, the worse it gets for Harris. And the final paragraphs are all about the reasons that the Trump people are excited. And I think if you just look detachedly from the horse race, and you just see what's happening, whether it's the earlier vote, whether it's the fact that Trump has closed the gap, whether it's these states like New Hampshire now are very tight. There's another poll from Virginia, which shows that it's much closer than Harris would want it. You have Trump now setting out to appear in Virginia as well as New Mexico, kind of the sleeper state, I think, in this entire election. And then you look at the Senate races, which are left out, I think, until maybe the very end of the New York Times piece. The fact that the Republican Senate candidates in the blue wall states have now closed the gap, and all three races, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, are tied essentially at the Senate level. That, I think, also is a reason to be slightly confident on our side. And finally, there's a quote from Simon Rosenberg in the story. Simon Rosenberg is a Democratic strategist who correctly called 2022. And he talks about, most powerful force in American politics since 2016 has been the anti-Trump vote, the anti-MAGA vote. And then he says, we know Trump will underperform his polls. But we actually don't know that, because in the past two races where he's been on the ballot, he's overperformed the polls. Now, will he do that again? We just don't know. But that's, again, that Rosenberg is making an assertion. He's not providing any evidence for his claim. So I do treat this story as, you call it hopium. I almost call it copium, kind of a way to say, don't worry, we're still in this, everybody. Go vote. Still support her.
Sorry. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, I just want to put in a word for a theory that I think you guys are going to disagree with me on, which is that if things don't go Trump's way, ultimately, I think people are going to look back on the Madison Square Garden rally as being a little bit more determinative than we're giving it credit for right now, because it's not just that this comic made a tasteless joke. The entire Democratic establishment had set Trump up for this moment, and he kicked the ball and they pulled it away. I mean, that's the wrong analogy. But they had been saying this is going to be a Nazi rally. He's a Nazi. And then he did that. And then he didn't do that. But then this comic did it. And from what most people know of the rally, they're not going to know necessarily that it was a comic. They're going to just know that it was said, that this was hate-filled. And then we're going to have Kamala's closing speech, which is going to be the opposite.
And then we're going to have 7 days. I mean, that's the thing, is that anything could happen. But I will just say, I partly agree, partly disagree. If it doesn't go Trump's way, what I think we will look back and say is that the Trump campaign was overconfident. That since June, since July, rather, since the assassination attempt, this campaign has been flexing its muscles. The Vance pick for vice president, that was a confidence pick. The RNC, that was a confidence convention. The Madison Square Garden rally, that is a move of a campaign that thinks it's going to win. And now this new travel to states that aren't the crucial battlegrounds, that too, that's a confidence pick and a confidence move. And look, it could be right, but it wasn't right when Hillary Clinton decided to skip that last rally in Wisconsin in 2016.
Prudence would have dictated beforehand. If you're going to have a rally at Madison Square Garden and you're loading everybody's speeches into the teleprompter, somebody who has seichel, common sense, should be reading through what's in the teleprompter.
Apparently that joke wasn't in the teleprompter.
No, it was.
That's not what I read.
Because they cut. I read differently, so maybe somebody can correct.
They did cut stuff. They read it and
they cut stuff from
one
him.
One or two of the things was too far.
He said something about Hillary. He used some curse word about Hillary, and they made him take it out. So booking him in the first place, apparently this is who he is. Prudence would dictate that, okay, Trump's Trump and he is and everything, and he's politically incorrect, and he went on Joe Rogan and he got 30 million people and all of that. But, you're still not going to have, it's still wise to have a kind of senior person looking at things and saying, we should probably cut that. Like, I don't think that's not going to advance our interests. And it's a little too edgy. We don't really need edgy. Trump's edgy. Trump's edgy enough. Trump's the edgiest person in the history of politics and all of that. And that's where I think you could get into the situation in which, when you're doing a postmortem and Trump loses, you say, well, there's nothing you can do about him. There's nothing, he is who he is. He'll say what he'll say and all of that. But, if the atmospherics around him start getting a little bananas, if J.D. Vance starts going around saying that, Dick Cheney murdered millions of people, that's not helpful. Like, maybe it didn't hurt. I don't know. I don't know who it helps to say that Dick Cheney, Liz Cheney and Dick Cheney endorse Harris, and J.D. Vance says he killed millions of people. You really want to say that the vice president of the United States killed millions of people? Is that where you want to go? Okay, go there. Let's see what happens. In the end, it could just make you all make you sound like you're the kind of person, all is said and done. I'm not comfortable with that, particularly if I'm somebody who's sort of like in the middle of the road. I don't feel that way about America. I didn't even like Dick Cheney, but I don't think he murdered millions of people. I don't know. It's just like little bits and pieces of things. And, in the Halperin categorization, the one thing that's missing is this question of sheer technical competence over the next week. Republicans have demonstrated greater technical competence than people thought that they would in getting out the early vote. That is self-evidently the case. Republicans have more early voters in Florida. They have more early voters in Nevada, and they have more early voters in Arizona, and that was not the case in 2020. So if you're going to have early voting, you want to lead in early voting. It doesn't make any sense that you don't want to lead in early voting because you want to lead in voting, period. And so they've shown more technical competence there. But Democrats are really good technically at elections. And we have no idea whether the Trump RNC and the Trump super PACs that are helping coordinate the get out the vote efforts and all that are good at this. We just know that Democrats are good at this. And if it comes down to it's like a jump ball race, and what matters is who can run election day better for their side, I would lean toward the Democrats. Even though I know Republicans have done better on election day in the last two major elections because of early voting than Democrats have. It's just like in 2012 and in 2008, but particularly in 2012, they just blew the rafters off of turnout expectations in ways that Republicans did not. And they do this they've done this in special elections. They did this in the Georgia specials, even though Trump played a role in the suppressing or depressing the Republican vote in the 2021 runoff elections. They've done a lot of it.
And we should say they've usually, historically, the Democrats have had that problem in the midterms, but lately they haven't had the same problem in the midterms.
Right. So the one place that we by definition are interested in the ideas that are being promulgated and expressed and what they say about America and how America is going to vote. But at some point, sheer technical competence at the doing of this thing starts at least becoming equal, if not superior, in importance. And I think one place in which the Trump people seem to have proven themselves better than the Harris people is in the late ads, because the Harris ads are the same ads that she's been running for 2 months, and maybe they work, but don't they also wear out? Like, if you're going to just do abortion for 2.5 months, and also, by the way, in states like where I am, granted it's New York, so these are congressional races in New York, but they're competitive congressional races in New York, and every ad is about abortion. That's New York, New Jersey. There are 8 contested districts. Never seen anything like it. Like you just can't not hear an ad about abortion. And I feel like maybe if that's the way it is everywhere else, it starts having diminishing returns as an issue set. Like, obviously you want it top of mind of voters if that's what you think is going to get them to the polls. But not everything is like a one-trick pony. You gotta show, or you have to show a curveball as well as a fastball if you're gonna win a game, as the Yankees are now proving to their detriment. Okay, we have not talked about Jeff Bezos's op-ed. I mean, Christine mentioned it, and maybe we really don't have time, but I do encourage people to look it up and read it. It's pretty staggering. I assume that he didn't write it, so I just want to say, because I kind of suspect that maybe the person who wrote it might be somebody who listens to this podcast. I don't know who it is. I really don't. But I'm just saying, like, there's something about the tone of it that suggests that it's somebody in our ambit. It's a pretty remarkable piece of writing, because what he says is the media, like every major institution in the United States, has lost its credibility and is losing its credibility. I own this place. I own the Washington Post. I'm losing money on it. Trust me when I know that I'm not the best steward for this. It's competing with my other businesses. It's making my life more difficult in some ways. But I think this institution is important. I'm not going to let it go down without a fight. And the people who run it effectively, or the people who run the mainstream media, are destroying their own credibility because they only talk to each other. While I do not and will not push my personal interest, Bezos says, I will also not allow this paper to stay on autopilot and fade into irrelevance, overtaken by unresearched podcasts and social media barbs, not without a fight. It's too important. And what does he mean by that? He says the Washington Post and the New York Times win prizes, but increasingly we talk only to a certain elite. more and more we talk to ourselves. This is if he means it and isn't just trying to come up with some face-saving cover for the fact that they've seemed to have lost 200,000 subscribers over the last 3 days because of their refusal to endorse Kamala Harris. Some interesting stuff could be happening at the Washington Post over the next year or two, if he means it. Because,
well, remember, he's installed a new publisher and a new editor, and that in itself occasioned a huge amount of liberal browbeating and revolt in the newsroom. That had quieted down prior to this latest controversy over the refusal to endorse. So something's afoot at the Washington Post. And for me, the most telling statistic in the op-ed is when he said that in the 1990s, the Washington Post had 80% market penetration in the DMV, then DC, Maryland, and Virginia. And it just put me back to the 90s, my favorite decade. And that was the time where if you lived in this area, as I did growing up here in Northern Virginia, you would encounter the radio and TV ads for if the Washington Post, if you don't get it, you don't get it, right? And that was the glory days of that paper. It was a writer's paper. It had great local coverage, great sports coverage in it. I was thinking, imagine the Post of that era covering the Washington Commanders team and its new quarterback, Jaden Daniels, and just this miraculous end to the game they had on Sunday. Everyone would be talking about it, be front page. That's not the paper anymore. The paper made a decision to go digital and to go national and global and to pretend to be the New York Times. And the result has been tragic in every single way. And so I hope that Bezos is aiming to recapture. It seems like that's where he wants to go back to. I don't know whether it's possible in today's media environment, but that to me was the most telling and in a way bittersweet statistic in his excellent op-ed.
Matt, you said Tony Kornheiser made his name at the Washington Post as a sports writer.
And as a humor columnist, he wrote a weekly column for the style section.
I mean, I don't want to over glamorize the Washington Post in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, you were in the trenches.
Editor paper at number one and number two, like it was very obnoxious.
Right.
It had an obnoxious quality. It was very full of itself and very arrogant as a journalistic institution, but it owned its metropolitan area, and you could not live there without reading it and it made you understand the city. And now it barely has any connection to the city, number one. And number two, he's right that the paper is written and edited for the paper and for the New York Times. And why did it lose 200,000 subscribers over the last 3 or 4 days? Because it chose to make as its mission turn itself into a virtue signaling sheet for the resistance. Democracy dies in darkness. That's what it went with as its marketing tool under him. So, it's not like he wasn't a participant in this decision making as a marketing matter. But yeah, so I guess if you're not going to endorse Kamala Harris at the moment of greatest peril for the democracy that's going to die in darkness, and you're somebody who's been paying $400 a year to read the Washington Post because that's what you want from your media, are messages that reassure you that democracy isn't going to die in darkness, of course you should cancel by the hundreds of thousands. If he is willing to shoulder the extra losses that come from losing those subscribers and try to build anew with an entirely new understanding of what it is that the journalistic mission of the Washington Post is, that could be a very interesting decade that we're going to see. Yeah. And it will be fought inside like nobody's business. And it will be very ugly, and it will not it will not be fun for Jeff Bezos. So I assume he's got other interests, and he is going to offload this place as soon as he possibly can.
Okay, so if he has buyer's remorse, but we judge him by what he just published, and it sounds like he wants to stick it out, then what he could do is actually what a couple other wealthy people are doing, which is look at returning it to what Matt was describing, a local paper. I moved here in 1995, and I always got a subscription to the local paper, whatever city or town I lived in. And it was useful. It was hugely useful coming to this city where I didn't know anyone or know what was going on. I read the paper every day, but I mainly read local coverage. And I think that if you look across the media landscape now in terms of newspapers, we've between Craigslist and other market forces, local news doesn't exist. And local corruption is a serious problem throughout this country right now because there is no accountability. There aren't these journalists who then also learn how to be real journalists by going to those meetings, city council meetings, and following the details of what the mayor's staff is doing here or there. That's really important for democracy. That's where democracy dies in darkness, is when we don't know what our government at the local level is even doing.
Well, that is a lot easier to be angry at Trump.
No, it is.
Let's just be angry at Trump.
That's right.
It is, but let's face it. If you were going to be that paper that you're describing over the last 7 or 8 years, the paper that you would produce would cover what? Wildly increased crime
Housing,
in D.C.
crime,
housing problems, Prince William, Fairfax, and Loudoun County school boards,
immigration,
right? Immigration, imposing totalitarian rules on families and trying to get people arrested for speaking out at school boards. Everything that you would cover that was a proper local issue, that's like, oh my God, I'm covering the Fairfax County School Board, and I can have a front page article about what's going on at a school board meeting. Like, but Seth is the one of us who actually did stuff like that professionally at the beginning of his career. Like, that didn't happen.
But what happens now is we have candidates for president or vice president saying people in this small town are eating cats and dogs. Yeah. And there is no real local news coverage to go. Actually, we've been following this story of the immigrants for 10 years.
Right. But that's my point is that you could run a local paper out of the Washington Post, and the staff of the Washington Post would refuse to write the articles because they would require them to talk about black on black crime and imposition of trans rules on unsuspecting and unknowing parents, and the upset that people have over curricula that downgrade the United States. Those would be the subjects of the news coverage.
Well, start recruiting your young journalists out of different colleges.
Out of the University of Texas, the University of Austin,
right,
and Hillsdale.
As I always say, tell me how many hours you've spent this week at the Zoning Board of Adjustment, and I will tell you what how well trained you are as a local journalist.
I would just love Karen Attia to have to go cover the Loudoun County School Board for 5 minutes. Anyway, Seth, you have a recommendation, I believe.
I do. So my recommendation is the new novel by Rumaan Alam, which is called Entitlement. Rumaan Alam is the author of Leave the World Behind from 2020, and it was made into a popular Netflix movie and done by the Obamas. Speaking of the Obamas, production team on Netflix, so it was a pretty big thing. His new novel Entitlement is very different. The first one was kind of almost post-apocalyptic in a way, and Entitlement is very it sneaks up on you. It's about a billionaire who creates a foundation to give away all his money before he dies, and especially one employee of that foundation who is slowly driven to the brink of total irrationality by just being close to the amount of money that she is tasked with giving away. And so she is, the theme is, by the way, that these middle class and upper middle class people have the hardest time with being close to that much money because it feels maybe within reach and maybe they can get it. And so, but she also is in this world where this guy has $3.5 billion. He wants to give it away. And he says, let's find problems to solve. And so she's doing things like, repatriating oysters into, the Hudson Bay or whatever, which brings back the ecosystem that one day will bring back whales or this and that. And she slowly starts to go mad from this knowledge that, she really needs an apartment. And this guy could buy her a beautiful apartment on the east side with a rounding error and not know, that sort of thing. And
okay, so I'm literally downloading this book right now because I just have to say, not that I want to go into any detail, that this is a life circumstance that is deeply well known to several of us on this panel. The proximity, it's subject of David Brooks's most famous essay, The Status Income Disequilibrium Problem in the Weekly Standard. Sounds fantastic. That's Ruman Alam's, and the title again? Entitlement. Okay. That's a great recommendation. I'm sorry to cut you off, but we're running long, so we should get out of here. We'll be back tomorrow. For Matt, Seth, Christine, and Abe, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.